Imagine getting away with murder because there's no one around to form a jury. Today we're going to dive into the real ridiculous legal loopholes that should be illegal but aren't. Let's not hide the ball, let's start with how to legally get away with murder. Now believe it or not, there's a special class of people who can do murder with James Bond level impunity. And that's foreign diplomats. Under the Vienna Convention, diplomats have full immunity for criminal prosecution in the country where they serve. So local police generally cannot arrest or charge them, even for serious offenses. And if a diplomat commits a crime, all the host country can do is kick them out of that country. Now, why would countries agree to give diplomats such sweeping immunity from persecution? Well, because they want their own diplomats to have the same protections abroad. The concept of special status of foreign envoys and messengers dates back to antiquity, when Greeks and Romans wanted to ensure that their envoys would safely carry messages to foreign countries without fear of retribution. Today, diplomatic immunity typically includes all diplomatic agents, including administrative personnel and service staff. Immunity also extends to family members who are part of the diplomat's household. And under international and federal law, diplomats also enjoy broad immunity from many kinds of civil suits. A diplomatic agent isn't even required to give evidence as a witness. Seems like a pretty sweet deal. But do diplomatic agents really commit crimes? Well, yeah, they do. Let's start with moving violations. Diplomats in DC owe $835 million in unpaid parking tickets. That's more than the GDP of some countries. The top offender is Saudi Arabia, which won the gold medal in the illegal U-turn Olympics by posting a score of 662 tickets totaling over $65,000. The Saudi government refused to comment about its unpaid fines because under the law, they don't have to pay. But on the other end of the spectrum are violent offenses. Could a diplomat get away with a homicide? Well, yeah, it's actually happened before. For example, in 2019, State Department employee Anne Sakalas hit and killed a 19-year-old Englishman Harry Dunn, who was riding his motorcycle near Royal Air Force Base Croughton. Sakalas was driving on the right side of the road instead of the left. But the US invoked diplomatic immunity because her husband worked at the US Air Force Communications Base at Croughton, and the family then hightailed it out of the country. The British public was outraged, and the United Kingdom pressured the United States to waive diplomatic immunity. But the US said no way. President Trump invited the Dunn family to meet with him at the White House in 2019. However, when they arrived for the meeting, Trump told them that Anne Sakalas was in the next room, and the family felt that Trump had ambushed them and they left. But they did not give up on justice for their son. The family tried to get the Biden administration to waive immunity, but Biden also would not budge. And after protracted negotiations with the family, Sakalas appeared in a UK court by video and pleaded guilty to minor charges. However, the US government refused the UK's extradition request, and Sakalas declined to travel back to the UK. A judge eventually sentenced her to an 8-month prison sentence.
The sentence is 8 months imprisonment, suspended for 12 months.
But she'll never have to serve it. Though in some cases, the diplomat's home country prosecutes the person for a crime committed on foreign soil. That's what happened to Christopher Van Gotham, an American Marine who served at the US Embassy in Romania. Van Gotham ran a red light and killed Romanian rock star Teo Peter in 2004. But the Bush administration refused to waive immunity, sparking mass protests in Bucharest. But Van Gotham faced a court-martial in the United States. In 2006, he was acquitted of the most serious charge of negligent homicide, but was found guilty of making false statements and obstruction of justice. Though some countries have waived their diplomatic immunity to allow their diplomats to be prosecuted. In 1997, a drunk diplomat from Georgia, Georgi Makarajda, crashed into a line of 5 cars near DuPont Circle, killing Jovian Waltrick, who was just 16 years old. Georgia waived immunity and he pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter. But the takeaway is that for the most part, diplomats can commit a crime, waive their passport, and leave the country as long as their government supports them. But there's actually more than one way to get away with murder in America. There happens to be a zone of death where it might actually be legal to kill someone. Speaking of loopholes, this next loophole allows you to watch the exclusive extended cut of this video and our entire library of content without ads for free. The catch is that you have only 72 hours to do it. That's because today's sponsor, Nebula, is now offering a 3-day trial that gives you unlimited access to everything on our platform. So if you've ever dreamed of speedrunning a deep understanding of how our legal system works, I dare you to see how much LegalEagle content you can watch on our dime. And don't worry, you'll still get an email reminding you the day before your free trial ends. But if you do decide to keep it, that's cool too, maybe even better. You'll still get the exclusive LegalEagle discount by clicking on the link or scanning the code. Because if you didn't know, Nebula is a streaming service where you can watch all the content from your favorite creators like Neo, Jetlag, Real Engineering, Real Life Lore, and of course, LegalEagle, ad-free and early. Plus, watch countless Nebula exclusive videos made with love, time, effort, and increased budgets that would be too risky on YouTube. I personally love Abolish Everything. It's an original comedy show where comedians argue to abolish everyday aspects of society against a panel who are hell-bent on preserving the status quo. It's hilariously reminiscent of what practicing law can often feel like. And at Nebula, we're in it for the longest possible term, a lifetime. That's why my link and code will get you $200 off the regular lifetime subscription rate of $500. That means for just $300, you can start watching every LegalEagle video ad-free and early forever. And that's good because every video we've made this year is an extended cut exclusively on Nebula, including more hilarious legal analysis I did with Brennan Lee Mulligan, and the beatdown that Dr. Mike and I did of The Good Doctor. On Nebula, this video contains over 20 minutes of insight and analysis that we had to cut from the YouTube version. And with the holidays coming up, Nebula makes a great gift. If you use my link or code, Nebula gift cards include my 40% off discount for both lifetime and annual subscriptions. That's a whole year or a lifetime of the best content. Either way, click or scan now to get set up and continue watching LegalEagle on Nebula, or I'll see you in court. Now, there's a section of Yellowstone National Park in Idaho where a person could theoretically commit a crime like murder and avoid prosecution. We've talked about the zone of death before, and Tom Scott even took his life into his own hands by traveling there in person. But here's how it works. Yellowstone National Park spans 3 states, Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. However, the entire park is under the jurisdiction of the U.S. District Court for the District of Wyoming, including the parts that spill into Montana and Idaho. But the Sixth Amendment requires that a jury be drawn from the state and the federal district where the crime occurred. It says, quote, "In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by impartial jury of the state and district where the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law." And that's called a vicinage requirement. But there is a 50 square mile portion of Yellowstone National Park that's in the state of Idaho, but in the judicial district of Wyoming, which is not Idaho's federal district. So if a crime occurs in that Idaho portion of Yellowstone, a jury would legally need to be made up of people who live in both Idaho and the District of Wyoming. But here's the catch. Literally no human beings live in the small Idaho section of the park. You'd have a better chance of forming a jury in Narnia. Therefore, it would be theoretically impossible to form a constitutionally valid jury. That means you probably can't constitutionally try someone for a crime committed there without violating that person's Sixth Amendment rights. That's why Georgetown law professor Brian C. Kalt has called this area the zone of death. Now, so far, no one has committed a serious crime in the zone of death, at least not that we know about. And if it did happen, a court might fashion a new interpretation of the Sixth Amendment by allowing the trial to move to another venue. But as Brian Kalt points out, quote, "The Yellowstone loophole is not a result of some inherent flaw in the concept of vicinage that should lead courts to eviscerate the Sixth Amendment's right to a jury trial. Rather, the cause is that Congress was sloppy when it created the District of Wyoming." But that means there's a simple solution. Congress could just close the loophole with a one-sentence law. And despite multiple proposals, Congress hasn't gotten around to it yet. So that means the zone of death will just sit there like a Chekhov's gun until some scofflaw decides to use it. But imagine breaking into a house, staying long enough, and the law saying, well, finders keepers. This actually works because of an ancient loophole that turns a trespasser into a homeowner. As every law student learns in law school, this is a process called adverse possession, a legal doctrine in the US inherited from English common law. In medieval England, landowners often lived far from their holdings and property lines weren't always clear. If someone took over an abandoned or unused land, improved it and occupied it openly for a set amount of time, the law rewarded them with ownership. And although each state sets its own rules, the basic elements of adverse possession are surprisingly consistent with the OG English version of the law. Generally, a person must occupy the property in a way that's actual, open, and notorious, exclusive, hostile, and continuous for a period defined by state law, typically between 5 and 20 years. Now, the point of this law is to have clear title. If you don't have great records about who owns what, and you have someone living on a land, improving it, and paying taxes on it, then after a set amount of time, almost like a statute of limitations, it's just easier to pretend that that person owns the land, and eventually they do. So yes, it is possible for someone to legally claim ownership of land they don't own, didn't buy, and didn't inherit. But unfortunately, this loophole is sometimes exploited by people acting in bad faith. For example, in 2013, a Dallas man named Kenneth Robinson made national headlines when he moved into a $330,000 foreclosed home using a $16 adverse possession form he downloaded online. Robinson spent months searching for the right house. The property he selected had been in foreclosure for more than a year, and the owner didn't live there. In the meantime, the lender that held the mortgage went out of business. So Robinson broke in, changed the locks, and paid property taxes. And he even maintained the lawn. And then he claimed the home under Texas's adverse possession laws. And while he was eventually evicted after a legal battle, the loophole let him live there rent-free in a luxury home for nearly 8 months, and it took an actual property owner going to court to force him out. And despite all the headaches it causes, adverse possession hasn't gone away. And in a housing market this brutal, the dream of home ownership can push some people to get creative, which brings us to our next loophole. So let's hop across the pond to England, the land of double-decker buses, lukewarm beer, and extremely restrictive building codes. And let's talk about Robert Fiddler, a farmer and amateur castle enthusiast who pulled off one of the boldest planning stunts in UK history. His story starts with an obscure clause in the Town and Country Planning Act of 1990. In England, just owning the land doesn't give you the right to build whatever you want. You need planning permission, and if you don't get it, the local council can make you demolish the whole thing. But if 4 years go by after you finish the building and no one complains, then your unauthorized structure becomes immune from enforcement. It's like squatters' rights, but for buildings. So what did Robert Fiddler do? He wanted to build a mock Tudor castle complete with battlements, a turret, and even a moat. But instead of getting proper approvals, Fiddler had a more medieval idea. He built the whole thing in secret, hiding it behind a 40-foot wall of hay bales and tarps. And he actually pulled it off. In this 2008 Google image, you can actually see a stack of hay bales covered with a blue tarp. And that's Fiddler's house underneath. And when the house was complete, Fiddler kept the giant hay structures in place so that no one would know what was behind them. So Fiddler and his family lived inside the structure, just staring out the windows at columns of hay while they waited for the 4 years to elapse. Yes, for 4 years, his family literally lived in a full-sized house surrounded by haystacks, like some kind of reverse Trojan horse, all the while hoping that the clock would run out on the planning authorities. And the end result was actually kind of cool. The brick family home had 4 bedrooms, a gravel forecourt, ramparts, and replica cannon. There was even a moat to keep out the intruders, like the town council. And it almost worked. From 2002 to 2006, no one reported the building. But once the hay bales came down, the castle was revealed in all its glory, and the local council was not amused. They argued that the 4-year clock hadn't started until the structure was visible, another legal loophole. And eventually the appeals court sided with the town council and ruled that the 4 years did not start to run until the building was actually revealed to the public. So in other words, it would be wrong to let Fiddler benefit from deliberate concealment of the project. And when Fiddler lost his court case, he tried to get his house approved, but the town would not budge. And they ordered him to demolish the house. And in 2016, he finally tore down the perfectly good family home. The moral of the story? If you're going to exploit a loophole in planning law, make sure your enemies can't counter with a loophole of their own. Or maybe just hire a lawyer from the start. But if you want to take advantage of your own legal loopholes, you're gonna need a great lawyer. Luckily, I know a guy. Now, after I started this channel, every week I'd get hundreds of comments and emails from viewers who are dealing with legal problems. And they'd ask, can you help me find a lawyer? How do I know if this attorney is any good? And there's a massive gap in our justice system. It's that people don't know how to find the right lawyer for their specific situation. They're scared, they're overwhelmed, and they end up doing nothing or hiring the first attorney who calls them back. And that really bothered me. So I started to wonder, what if there was a different way? What if we could build a law firm that actually lived up to the values that I talk about on this channel? Transparency, accessibility, and putting clients first instead of chasing billable hours. A firm where you don't need to pay anything up front, and your lawyers only get paid if you do, to maximize your opportunity for justice. So a few years ago, I decided to fix that problem. I decided to start my own personal injury law firm. And honestly, it wasn't an easy choice. But I realized I was in this unique position. I had this platform, this community, and the experience. Not to get rich, trust me, there are easier ways to make money than starting a law practice. But we did it because access to justice shouldn't be a luxury. Because finding the right legal representation shouldn't feel like playing Russian roulette with your future. And when you work with my firm, you're not just getting a lawyer. You're getting a team that understands that behind every case is a real person with real stakes. If we can't represent you or you're in a state where we don't practice, we'll take the time to try to match you with an attorney in my personal network of lawyers. A national network of some of the best lawyers in the country who actually specialize in what you're going through, located right where you are, not just whoever happens to be available. So if you're dealing with a personal injury, a car crash, a data breach, sexual harassment, a social security or workers' comp issue, give us a call at the number on screen or click on the link below. Now, I can't represent everyone that watches this channel. I wish I could, but what I can do is make sure that when you need legal help, you have somewhere to turn to that you can trust. So whether it's me handling your case or the incredible attorneys we partnered with, you'll get the same principles of honesty and education that we bring to every video. And if you're dealing with a legal issue and you're not sure where to start, check out the link in the description. Let's have a conversation about how we can help you find not just a lawyer, but the right lawyer for your situation. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, making sure that when life gets complicated, you don't have to face it alone. Which is why when you need a lawyer, you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle team.